Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Tonight we're going to do something a little different. I've got some absolutely wild Reddit stories lined up for you, the kind that will have you questioning everything you thought you knew about family, love, and the people closest to you. But instead of the usual chaos, we're keeping things calm tonight. Just you, me, some soothing Minecraft gameplay in the background, and stories that range from heartbreaking to absolutely unhinged. So grab your favourite blanket, maybe make yourself a warm drink, and let's just decompress together. Because honestly, sometimes the best way to deal with the stress of everyday life is to listen to someone else's drama for a while. It puts things in perspective, you know? Before we dive in, I just want to say thank you so much for all the support on this channel. Every like, every comment, every subscription means the world to me. You guys are the reason I keep doing this. Alright, let's not waste any more time. Get comfortable and let's explore some stories that will probably make your jaw drop. Our first story tonight comes from someone who discovered that the person who was supposed to protect them had been harbouring a devastating secret. This one is heavy, so brace yourselves. I caught my mother having an affair with my boyfriend of 4 years. I'm 24 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I thought I had my life pretty well figured out. I had been dating Marcus since my junior year of college. We met in an economics class, of all places, and there was just this instant connection. He was charming, attentive, and seemed to genuinely care about building a future together. We moved in together after graduation, splitting a small apartment while we both worked on establishing our careers. My mother, Sandra, is 48 and has been divorced from my father for about 6 years now. Their marriage fell apart due to what my mother always described as irreconcilable differences, but I later learned there had been infidelity on her part. She seemed to have changed after the divorce, focusing on herself, going to therapy, and becoming what I thought was a better person. She even told me multiple times how proud she was of me for finding a stable, loving relationship. Marcus got along great with my family from the start, maybe a little too great looking back. My mother would always compliment him, saying things like how lucky I was to have found such a wonderful man and how she wished she'd found someone like him when she was my age. I took it as her being supportive. I was so naive. About 2 months ago, I started noticing small things that seemed off. Marcus would be on his phone more than usual, angling the screen away from me when I walked by. He started working late more frequently, which he blamed on a big project at work. My mother also seemed to be unavailable a lot, saying she was taking extra shifts at her job or spending time with friends. I didn't connect these two things at all. Why would I? The day everything fell apart started like any other Sunday. Marcus said he was going to hit the gym and would be back in a couple of hours. I decided to surprise him by making his favourite dinner. I realised we were out of a few ingredients, so I grabbed my keys to run to the store. My mother lives about 15 minutes away, and her apartment complex happens to be on the way to the grocery store I usually go to. As I was driving past, I saw Marcus's car in the parking lot. My stomach dropped immediately. There was no reason for him to be at my mother's place without telling me. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe he was picking something up for me as a surprise. Maybe there was an emergency. I parked my car and walked up to her apartment. The door was slightly ajar, which was unusual because my mother was always paranoid about security. I pushed it open slowly, and the sounds I heard from the bedroom answered every question I didn't want to ask. I'll spare you the graphic details, but I walked in on them together. In her bed, my boyfriend of 4 years and my own mother, the woman who raised me, the woman who was supposed to be my safe place. The moment they saw me, time seemed to freeze. Marcus scrambled to cover himself, his face a mixture of shock and guilt. My mother just sat there, not even bothering to look ashamed. She actually had the audacity to say, "It's not what it looks like." I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. I just stood there, feeling like the floor was crumbling beneath my feet. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about the people I loved and trusted, was a lie. Finally, I found my voice. I asked them how long this had been going on. Marcus tried to say it was a mistake, a one-time thing, but my mother interrupted him. She said it had been about 8 months. 8 months. They had been sneaking around behind my back for nearly a third of our entire relationship. I asked my mother why. Why would she do this to me? She said, and I quote, "You can't help who you fall in love with. He chose to be with me because I understand him better than you ever could." That sentence broke something inside me. Not just my heart, but my fundamental understanding of what family means. This was my mother, the person who held me when I cried as a child, who taught me how to ride a bike, who told me she would always be there for me. And she had systematically destroyed my relationship while pretending to be my biggest supporter. I left without another word. I drove around for hours, not really knowing where I was going. Eventually, I ended up at my best friend's apartment. She let me in, took one look at my face, and just held me while I sobbed. I told her everything, and she was as horrified as I was. The aftermath has been brutal. I moved out of the apartment I shared with Marcus that same week. I couldn't stand to be in that space anymore. I've been staying with friends while I figure out my next steps. Marcus has tried to contact me dozens of times, sending texts and emails, apologizing and begging for another chance. He claims my mother pursued him and that he was weak and made a terrible mistake, as if that makes it better. My mother has also reached out, but her approach has been different. She's been defensive, almost aggressive. She sent me a long message explaining that she and Marcus have genuine feelings for each other and that I should be mature enough to accept that relationships are complicated. She said she never meant to hurt me, but that she deserves happiness too. The rest of my family is divided. My father, when he found out, was disgusted, but not entirely surprised given what happened during their marriage. He's been supportive of me, which I appreciate. My younger brother thinks I'm overreacting and that I should forgive Mum because family is family. My grandparents are heartbroken and have been calling me every day to check on me. What hurts the most isn't losing Marcus. I've realised that if he was capable of doing something like this, he was never the person I thought he was. What hurts is losing my mother. Not to death, but to her own choices. The mother I thought I had never really existed. She was always capable of this level of betrayal, and I was just too blind to see it. I'm in therapy now, trying to work through all of this. My therapist says it's going to take time to process this kind of trauma, and that my feelings of grief are completely valid. I'm grieving the loss of a relationship, yes, but more than that, I'm grieving the loss of the mother I thought I had. Some people have asked me if I'll ever forgive them. Honestly, I don't know. Right now, the thought of having any kind of relationship with either of them makes me physically ill. Maybe someday I'll reach a place of acceptance, but forgiveness feels impossible from where I'm standing now. If there's one thing I've learned from this experience, it's that the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally sometimes don't, and that's not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of who they truly are inside. Wow, that story is just devastating on so many levels. Imagine discovering that the two people you trusted most in the world had been deceiving you for 8 months. And the mother's response? Telling her own daughter that she deserves happiness too, as if her daughter's devastation is just an inconvenience. The audacity is truly staggering. This next story is another one about family betrayal, but it takes a slightly different angle. Let's see what happens when entitlement runs in the family. My sister demanded I give her my inheritance because she has kids and I don't. I'm 34 years old and have been child-free by choice my entire adult life. My sister, Rebecca, is 38 and has 3 children, aged 12, 9, and 6. We've always had different life paths, and for the most part, I thought we respected each other's choices. Turns out, I was very wrong about that. Our grandmother passed away about 4 months ago. She was 89 and had lived a full, wonderful life. I was extremely close to her. I visited her every weekend, helped her with appointments, made sure she had groceries, and just generally kept her company. Rebecca lives about an hour away and visited maybe twice a year, usually on holidays. When Grandma's will was read, we discovered she had left her estate split between the two of us, but not equally. I received 70% of everything, including her house, while Rebecca received 30% in cash. The total estate was worth about $600,000, so I got about $420,000 in assets, and Rebecca got $180,000. Rebecca was furious. She called me immediately after the reading and demanded to know what I had done to manipulate Grandma into changing her will. I told her I hadn't done anything except be present in Grandma's life, which was more than she could say. That didn't go over well. Over the next few weeks, Rebecca launched a full campaign to pressure me into splitting the inheritance equally. She started with guilt trips, saying that her kids deserved better and that I was selfish for keeping money I didn't need since I don't have children to support. She pointed out that I have a good job and no dependents, while she's a single mum struggling to make ends meet. I'll admit, I do have a comfortable income. But I also worked hard for it, and my financial stability wasn't handed to me. I put myself through school, took on multiple jobs, and built my career from the ground up. Rebecca, on the other hand, has made a series of poor financial decisions over the years and has been bailed out by family members multiple times. When the guilt trips didn't work, Rebecca escalated to involving other family members. She told everyone that I had poisoned Grandma against her and that I was stealing from her children. She even told her kids that Auntie was taking their college fund, which was a complete lie since the money was never designated for them in the first place. My parents were caught in the middle. My dad thinks I should do what Grandma wanted and keep things as they are. My mom, however, is on Rebecca's side. She keeps saying that family should take care of family and that I should think about my niece and nephews. She's even suggested that I give Rebecca the house since I don't have a family to fill it. The situation reached a boiling point at a family dinner last month. Rebecca showed up with a printed spreadsheet showing all her monthly expenses and how the extra inheritance money could help her family. She made a presentation, complete with projected costs for braces, activities, and future college expenses for her kids. She genuinely expected me to be moved by this. I told her that Grandma made her wishes clear and that I wasn't going to disrespect her memory by going against them. I also pointed out that the reason Grandma left me more wasn't random. It was because I was there. I was the one who held her hand when she was scared at the doctor. I was the one who spent holidays with her when everyone else was too busy. I earned that inheritance through love and presence, not manipulation. Rebecca completely lost it. She started screaming that I was punishing her for having children and that my child-free lifestyle made me selfish and incapable of understanding real responsibility. She said that I would die alone with no one to care about me and that my money wouldn't keep me warm at night. I calmly responded that at least my money was mine and that I didn't need to beg for scraps from people who actually worked for what they had. I know that was harsh, but I was done being attacked. The dinner ended with Rebecca storming out and several family members in tears. My mum has barely spoken to me since. She thinks I was cruel and that I should apologize. My dad has been quietly supportive but doesn't want to rock the boat further. Here's the thing that really gets me. Rebecca received $180,000. That's a significant amount of money by any standard. Most people would be thrilled to receive an unexpected $180,000. But because I received more, she's acting like she got nothing. It's not about what she has, it's about what I have. It's pure jealousy disguised as concern for her children. I've decided to go low contact with Rebecca for the foreseeable future. I've blocked her on social media and told her I won't be responding to any more messages about the inheritance. If she wants to have a relationship with me that isn't centered on what I can give her, I'm open to that. But I'm done being treated like an ATM with a heartbeat. As for the money, I've put most of it into savings and investments. The house is being renovated, and I plan to move into it eventually. It feels right to live somewhere that holds so many memories of Grandma. Every time I walk through those rooms, I feel her presence, and that's worth more than any amount of money. The entitlement in that story is just breathtaking. Rebecca received $180,000, and her response was to demand more because her sister doesn't have children? As if being child-free means your hard-earned relationships and inheritances don't count. And the audacity of making a presentation to try to guilt her sister into handing over money that was specifically left to her by their grandmother. Some people really think the world revolves around them. Let's shift gears a bit. This next story is about betrayal in a different context, one that involves friendship and the kind of hurt that comes from someone you thought had your back. My best friend of 15 years slept with my fiancée and then asked to be my maid of honor. I'm 29 years old, and until recently, I thought I knew what true friendship looked like. My best friend, whom I'll call Megan, and I met in middle school. We survived high school drama together. went to colleges in the same city to stay close, and supported each other through every major life event. She was there when my dad got sick, and I was there when she went through her divorce. We were sisters in every way that mattered. I got engaged to my fiancé, David, about 18 months ago. We'd been together for 3 years before that, and he proposed on our anniversary trip to Italy. It was perfect, and Megan was the first person I called after my parents. She screamed with joy and immediately started talking about wedding plans. I asked her to be my maid of honor on the spot, and she cried happy tears. Planning the wedding was stressful, but exciting. Megan was incredibly helpful at first, going to dress fittings with me, helping me choose flowers and venues, and generally being the supportive best friend I always knew her to be. David seemed to appreciate her help too, often saying how lucky I was to have such a dedicated friend. About 4 months before the wedding, I started noticing some changes. Megan and David seemed to have developed their own friendship, which I thought was great at first. They would text each other about wedding logistics, and sometimes she would call him directly to coordinate things. I trusted them both completely, so I didn't think anything of it. Then the texts became more frequent. David started being protective of his phone, something he had never done before. He would take calls in another room and claim it was work-related. Megan became harder to reach, often cancelling our plans at the last minute with vague excuses. The truth came out in the most devastating way possible. I came home early from a work trip that had been cut short. David didn't know I was coming back that day. I walked into our apartment and found them together on our couch. Not physically intimate at that moment, but she was curled up against him and they were watching a movie like they were a couple. They jumped apart when they saw me, and the guilty looks on their faces told me everything I needed to know. I demanded to know what was going on. David tried to play it off as nothing, just friends hanging out. But Megan, maybe out of guilt or maybe because she'd wanted to come clean for a while, started crying and admitted everything. They had been sleeping together for 2 months. 2 months of deception while I was planning my wedding and trusting them both with my future. I felt like I was drowning. Every memory I had of the past few months was tainted. Every time Megan helped me pick out wedding details, she was secretly sleeping with the groom. Every time David said he loved me, he was lying. The life I thought I was building was a complete illusion. I ended the engagement that night. David tried to explain, saying he got caught up in something he didn't understand and that he still loved me. I told him that love doesn't involve sleeping with your fiancé's best friend for 2 months while she plans her wedding. That's not confusion. That's betrayal with a clear plan. Megan's reaction was somehow worse. After a few days of silence, she reached out to apologize, but then she said something that still haunts me. She said that she and David had a real connection and that she hoped I could eventually forgive them because she still wanted to be in my life. She actually asked if, down the road when things settled, she could still be my maid of honor if David and I worked things out. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She had destroyed my relationship, my trust, my sense of self, and she was asking if she could still stand next to me at my wedding. The delusion was so complete that I actually laughed. It was either laugh or scream, and I chose to laugh. I cut them both out of my life completely. I had to cancel all the wedding plans, which was its own kind of humiliation. Calling vendors and explaining that the wedding was off was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Some of the deposits were non-refundable, so I lost several $1,000s on top of everything else. The fallout in our friend group has been messy. Some people have tried to stay neutral, which I understand, even if it hurts. Others have picked sides. A few mutual friends have actually tried to justify what Megan did, saying that maybe she and David are really in love and that I should try to be happy for them eventually. Those people are no longer my friends. It's been 8 months now since everything happened. I'm in therapy, working through the trust issues and the grief. Because that's what it is, grief. I'm grieving the loss of my fiancé, but more than that, I'm grieving the loss of my best friend. 15 years of memories, of inside jokes and shared experiences, all poisoned by her choices. I've heard through the grapevine that Megan and David are now officially dating. They've been posting on social media about their relationship, complete with heart emojis and declarations of love. Part of me wonders if their relationship will last or if the foundation of betrayal will eventually crack. But honestly, I don't care anymore. Whatever happens to them is their karma to deal with. What I've learned from this experience is that some people will choose their own desires over their loyalty to you every single time. It doesn't matter how many years you've been friends or how much you've been through together. If they want something badly enough, they'll take it, regardless of who they hurt in the process. I'm slowly rebuilding my life and my ability to trust. I've made new friends who don't know the old me, and that fresh start has been healing in its own way. I'm not dating yet. The thought of being vulnerable with someone new is still too scary. But I'm told that will come with time. If you're going through something similar, my advice is this: cut your losses and move forward. People who betray you that deeply don't deserve your forgiveness or your continued presence in their life. Save your energy for healing, not for trying to understand why they did what they did. Some things can't be explained, only survived. Man, that story is tough. 15 years of friendship thrown away for a 2-month affair with her best friend's fiancé, and then having the nerve to ask if she could still be the maid of honor? The lack of self-awareness is almost impressive in how complete it is. Let's take a bit of a breather with the next story. This one is still dramatic, but it's more about entitled behavior than outright betrayal. My neighbor demanded I take down my Christmas lights because they were making her children jealous. I live in a nice suburban neighborhood where most people keep to themselves and respect each other's boundaries. I've been here for about 5 years and have never had any significant problems with my neighbors until this past holiday season. Every year, I go all out with Christmas decorations. It's something I've done since I was a kid with my dad, and continuing the tradition brings me joy. I spend weekends putting up lights, setting up lawn displays, and generally turning my house into a winter wonderland. Nothing crazy or disruptive, just a lot of effort and a lot of lights. This year, a new family moved in next door over the summer. A woman I'll call Karen, because the name fits perfectly, her husband, and their 2 kids aged about 8 and 10. They seemed friendly enough at first. We exchanged pleasantries when we saw each other outside, and I welcomed them to the neighborhood with a batch of cookies like any good neighbor would. Fast forward to December, and I started putting up my decorations the weekend after Thanksgiving, like I always do. I spent the entire weekend climbing ladders, stringing lights, and arranging my display. By Sunday night, my house looked amazing, if I do say so myself. Monday evening, Karen knocked on my door. I thought maybe she wanted to compliment the display or ask for recommendations on where I got my decorations. Instead, she launched into a tirade about how my lights were causing problems for her family. According to Karen, her children had been begging for their house to be decorated similarly, but she and her husband couldn't afford to buy that many lights and decorations. She said her kids would stare out the window at my house and cry about why they couldn't have the same thing. She actually blamed me for her children's unhappiness. I was stunned. I apologized that her kids were upset, but explained that I'd been doing this for years, and it was a tradition that meant a lot to me. I suggested maybe we could collaborate somehow, like I could give them some of my older decorations to help get them started. I thought I was being reasonable. Karen wasn't interested in compromise. She said the only fair solution was for me to take down some of my lights, so the difference between our houses wasn't so obvious. She wanted me to reduce my decorations to match what she was willing to put up on her own house, which was basically nothing. I told her politely but firmly that I wasn't going to alter my decorations to manage her children's emotions. That was her job as a parent, not mine. I suggested she could use this as a teaching moment about how different families have different traditions and budgets. She did not take this well. She called me selfish and said I was deliberately making her look bad in front of her kids. She accused me of being a show-off who didn't care about how my actions affected others. She even suggested that my elaborate display was actually a sign of insecurity and that I was compensating for something lacking in my life. I closed the door on her mid-rant. I had nothing more to say to someone who was clearly unreasonable. But Karen wasn't done. Over the next few weeks, she launched a one-woman campaign against my Christmas display. She posted in our neighborhood Facebook group about neighbors who put up excessive decorations without considering how it affected others. She implied that people who go overboard with holidays are attention-seeking narcissists. To my surprise and relief, most neighbors came to my defense. Several people commented that they loved driving by my house and that it brought them joy during the holiday season. One neighbor said they specifically took their grandkids to see my display every year. Karen's attempt to rally support completely backfired. Not deterred, Karen tried a different approach. She called the city to report me for some kind of violation. An inspector actually came out and confirmed that my display was completely legal. I wasn't blocking any sidewalks, my lights weren't too bright for residential codes, and I wasn't violating any noise ordinances with my small musical display. When that failed, Karen started sending her kids over to complain directly to me. She would send them to my door to ask why I had so many lights and why their family couldn't have the same thing. I felt terrible for those kids being used as pawns in their mother's petty war. I gently told them that different families do different things and that there's nothing wrong with either approach. Finally, about a week before Christmas, Karen's husband came over to apologize. He said his wife had become obsessed with my decorations and that he'd finally put his foot down. He was embarrassed by her behavior and wanted me to know that not everyone in his household was unreasonable. I appreciated his apology and told him there were no hard feelings on my end. He mentioned that they were planning to put up a few modest decorations of their own next year and asked if I'd be willing to give him some tips. I said absolutely, and we actually had a nice conversation about which lights were the best value and where to find deals. Karen never apologized to me. She just stopped acknowledging my existence entirely, which is honestly the best outcome I could have hoped for. When I see her now, she looks straight through me like I'm invisible. Fine by me. The whole experience taught me that some people will always look for reasons to be unhappy and someone to blame for their unhappiness. Karen could have used my display as inspiration, as a reason to start her own traditions with her kids. Instead, she chose to see it as a personal attack. That says everything about her and nothing about me. This year, I'm going even bigger with my Christmas display. Not out of spite, but because I love it and it brings joy to me and to most of my community. If Karen doesn't like it, well, she knows where her curtains are. The entitlement of some people truly knows no bounds. Imagine demanding that your neighbour take down their Christmas lights because your kids are jealous. That's not a neighbourhood problem. That's a parenting problem. Teach your kids that life isn't always equal and that other people's happiness doesn't diminish their own. All right, let's dive into another story. This one involves workplace drama and a boss who took things way too far. My manager tried to force me to work on my wedding day and was shocked when I quit on the spot. I worked at a mid-sized marketing agency for 3 years. For most of that time, I loved my job. The work was challenging but fulfilling. My co-workers were great, and I was steadily climbing the ladder. Then we got a new manager, and everything changed. The new manager, whom I'll call Derek, came in with a reputation for being a hard charger who got results. What that actually meant was that he was a micromanaging workaholic who expected everyone to match his unhealthy relationship with work. He would send emails at midnight and expect responses before morning. He would schedule meetings during lunch breaks and act offended if anyone had plans. He saw work-life balance as weakness. I had been engaged for about a year when Derek took over. My wedding date had been set for months, and I had informed HR and gotten approval for my time off long before Derek arrived. I was taking 2 weeks off for the wedding and honeymoon, which I thought was perfectly reasonable. About a month before my wedding, Derek called me into his office. He said he'd been looking at the schedule and noticed I had 2 weeks blocked off. He asked if there was any flexibility there, maybe taking just a week instead. I explained it was for my wedding and honeymoon, which had been approved months ago. Derek sighed like I'd said something incredibly inconvenient. He told me that a major project was launching during that time and that my skills were critical to its success. He asked if I could postpone my honeymoon and just take the wedding day itself off. I was speechless. This man was asking me to rearrange the most important day of my life around a work project. I told him no, that wasn't possible, that the reservations were made and non-refundable, and that my fiancé and I had been planning this for over a year. He then asked if my fiancé could be flexible about the wedding date. Maybe we could push it back a few months until after the project was done. I genuinely thought he was joking at first. When I realized he was serious, I told him firmly that the wedding date was not negotiable. Derek seemed annoyed but dropped it. I thought the matter was settled. 2 weeks before my wedding, I got an email from Derek. He had rejected my previously approved time off request, citing business needs. He expected me to be present for the project launch, which coincidentally was scheduled for the day after my wedding. He said I could have the wedding day itself off as a courtesy, but needed to report to work the following morning. I went straight to HR. I showed them the original approval and explained the situation. The HR rep seemed sympathetic, but said that managers had discretion over time off requests, and that Derek was within his rights to revoke approval if business needs required it. She suggested I try to work something out with him directly. I was furious but tried to stay calm. I went back to Derek and explained that I had made non-refundable travel arrangements and that my honeymoon was not something I could simply cancel. He suggested I look into travel insurance and said that sometimes we have to make sacrifices for our careers. That was the moment I knew I was done. I asked Derek to put his decision in writing, which he did via email. Then I went home and started updating my resume. 3 days before my wedding, I walked into Derek's office with my resignation letter. I told him I was leaving effective immediately and that I would not be available for the project launch or anything else. His face went from confused to angry to something that looked almost like panic in about 5 seconds. He tried to backtrack, saying maybe we could work something out after all. Maybe I could do some work remotely during my honeymoon. Maybe he could give me an extra day off after the project was done. I told him it was too late for compromises. He had shown me exactly how much he valued me as a person versus me as a resource, and I had made my decision. HR tried to intervene, offering to override Derek's decision and honour my original time off. But by then, the damage was done. I had already mentally checked out, and I knew that staying would mean working for someone who saw my wedding as an inconvenience to his project timeline. No thanks. I left that day and got married 3 days later without a care in the world about what was happening at my former job. My honeymoon was beautiful, and I spent it completely disconnected from anything work-related. When I got back, I had multiple messages from former co-workers telling me what had happened. The project launch had been chaotic without me, and several things had gone wrong that I would have caught. Derek had been forced to explain to upper management why a key team member had quit right before a major launch. Apparently, his explanation that I prioritized my wedding over work did not go over well. I heard through the grapevine that Derek was put on a performance improvement plan a few months later and eventually left the company. I don't know if it was directly related to what happened with me, but I like to think it contributed. I found a new job within a month, better pay, better culture, and a manager who understands that employees are human beings with lives outside of work. When I mentioned my recent wedding during the interview, my new boss congratulated me and said she hoped I was still basking in the honeymoon glow. Night and day difference. The moral of the story is this: never let a job convince you that your personal milestones are less important than their bottom line. Companies will replace you in a heartbeat if it suits their needs. You should be willing to replace them just as quickly when they show you they don't value you. Derek really thought asking someone to postpone their wedding for a work project was a reasonable request. The absolute audacity. And then being surprised when she quit? Some managers really do live in an alternate reality where they think their employees' entire existence should revolve around their job. Good for her for walking away. Let's continue with another workplace story, but this one has a different flavour. My co-worker took credit for my project and got promoted, but karma caught up with her spectacularly. I worked in the tech industry for about 7 years at the same company. I started as a junior developer and worked my way up to a senior position through dedication and a lot of late nights. I wasn't flashy or political. I just did good work and assumed that would be recognised. Enter Amanda. She was hired about 2 years into my tenure and immediately made an impression. She was charming, networked constantly, and always seemed to be in the right place at the right time. She was also, as I would eventually learn, completely willing to take credit for other people's work. The incident that changed everything started with a major project to overhaul one of our core systems. I was the technical lead, responsible for the architecture and implementation. Amanda was on the team in a support role, handling documentation and user testing. The project took about 8 months and involved some genuinely innovative solutions to problems our company had been struggling with for years. I was proud of the work and looking forward to presenting it to leadership. That's when things went wrong. Amanda had been building relationships with executives throughout the project, often meeting with them separately to provide updates. I thought she was just keeping stakeholders informed. In reality, she was positioning herself as the driving force behind the project. When presentation day came, I was shocked to find that Amanda had been scheduled as the primary presenter. My manager told me that leadership had specifically requested her because she had been their main point of contact. I was listed as a contributor rather than the lead. I tried to speak up, but my concerns were dismissed as jealousy. Amanda was charming and well-connected, and I was the quiet technical person who didn't play office politics. When she presented, she used my slides, my architecture diagrams, and my talking points, but told the story as if she had been the visionary behind it all. I sat in the back of the room, watching my work being stolen in real time. Amanda got a promotion and a significant raise. I got a generic thank you email. I was devastated and seriously considered quitting, but I had bills to pay and no immediate job prospects, so I stayed and tried to move forward. I told myself that karma would eventually catch up with her. It took about 18 months, but karma did indeed arrive. Amanda, riding high on her stolen success, was assigned to lead a new project even bigger than the one she had claimed credit for. This time, she didn't have me quietly doing the actual work in the background. She had to deliver on her own merits. The project was a disaster from the start. Amanda made poor architectural decisions that I could see from a mile away would cause problems. She ignored advice from senior engineers because she was the smart one now. She promised unrealistic timelines to impress executives. 6 months in, the project was behind schedule and over budget. Critical systems were failing in testing. Clients who had been promised the new features were threatening to cancel contracts. Leadership finally decided to bring in an outside consultant to assess what was going wrong. The consultant spent 2 weeks reviewing the project and interviewing team members. When his report came out, it was devastating for Amanda. He identified fundamental flaws in the architecture that any senior developer should have caught. He noted that the project lead seemed to lack the technical depth needed for a project of this complexity. Amanda tried to blame her team, but the documentation clearly showed that the key decisions had been hers. She had insisted on her approach, despite warnings from others. There was no one else to blame. She wasn't fired, but she was quietly demoted and moved to a different department. The project was handed over to someone else to salvage, which took another year and significant additional resources. Here's the satisfying part. After the consultant's review, leadership started looking more closely at Amanda's track record. They went back to the original project she had been promoted for and discovered that the actual technical work had been done by me. Former team members were interviewed and confirmed that I had been the true lead. I was called into my VP's office and given a belated but sincere apology. They offered me a promotion, a raise, and a bonus to make up for what had happened. They also asked if I would consider staying, as I had apparently started interviewing with competitors. I accepted the apology and the compensation, but turned down the promotion. I had actually gotten a great offer from another company during all of this, and I decided it was time for a fresh start somewhere my work would be recognized from day one. The last I heard, Amanda was still at the company, but in a much diminished role. She's apparently not so charming anymore when her incompetence is on full display. The experience taught me valuable lessons. First, document everything and make sure your contributions are visible. Second, office politics matter even if you don't want to play the game. And third, people who build their careers on stolen credit eventually run out of people to steal from. When they have to stand on their own, the truth comes out. That's a frustrating story to read, but the eventual vindication makes it worth it. Amanda learned the hard way that you can only fake competence for so long. Eventually, you're given real responsibility. And if you can't deliver, the truth comes out. Karma might take its time, but it usually arrives eventually. Alright, let's shift to a story about family drama involving weddings. Because apparently, weddings bring out the absolute worst in people. My future mother-in-law wore white to my wedding and threw a tantrum when she was asked to change. Planning my wedding was simultaneously one of the most exciting and stressful experiences of my life. My fiancé, Jason, and I had been together for 5 years, and we were thrilled to finally be making things official. What I wasn't thrilled about was dealing with his mother, Diane. Diane had been difficult from the moment Jason and I got serious. She didn't think I was good enough for her precious son and made sure I knew it in subtle and not so subtle ways. She criticized my job, my cooking, my family, my appearance, you name it. Jason defended me when he could, but he also had a hard time standing up to his mother directly. When we got engaged, Diane's behavior intensified. She wanted to be involved in every single decision, and if she didn't get her way, she would pout, cry, or give Jason the silent treatment until he caved. She insisted on certain venues, caterers, and even tried to dictate my dress choice. I drew the line at the dress, and she never forgave me for it. The wedding day arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves and excitement. I had my bridesmaids with me, helping me get ready and keeping my spirits high. Everything seemed to be going perfectly until my maid of honor came rushing in with a panicked look on her face. She told me that Diane had just arrived and I needed to see what she was wearing. I sent a bridesmaid to investigate, and she came back with a photo she had discreetly taken. Diane was wearing white, not cream, not off-white, not a white print, a solid white floor-length dress that could easily be mistaken for a wedding gown. I felt my heart sink. I had specifically requested that guests not wear white. It's a basic wedding etiquette rule that everyone knows. Diane knew exactly what she was doing. I decided to handle it before the ceremony. I sent Jason to talk to his mother, hoping he could convince her to change. He came back looking defeated. Diane had refused, saying she looked beautiful and that no one would confuse her for the bride anyway. She accused me of being insecure and controlling. This was my wedding day, and I was not going to let her ruin it. I asked my maid of honor to deal with the situation however she saw fit. What happened next became legendary among my friends and family. My maid of honor, bless her, approached Diane and explained calmly that she had two choices. She could change into something appropriate, or she could leave. There would be no third option of staying in that dress. Diane lost her mind. She started crying and screaming about being disrespected and how she was the mother of the groom and deserved to wear whatever she wanted. She demanded to speak to me directly, but my maid of honor held firm. She told Diane that I was busy becoming a bride and didn't have time for this nonsense. Jason finally stepped up, probably because he realized how badly this was going to go if it continued. He told his mother that either she changed or she would not be at his wedding. He said he had let her behavior slide too many times, and this was the final straw. Diane's face went through about 17 different emotions. Eventually, she realized no one was going to back down. She stormed off to her car, where apparently she had a backup outfit, which proves she knew exactly what she was doing and had anticipated pushback. She returned in a dark green dress that was perfectly appropriate. She was sullen and pouty for the rest of the wedding, but I didn't care. I was finally married to the love of my life, and his mother's tantrum was just a blip in an otherwise perfect day. The aftermath was interesting. Diane tried to spin the story to other family members as me being a bridezilla who forced her to change a perfectly fine outfit. But too many people had witnessed her white dress and her meltdown for that narrative to stick. Most of Jason's family actually apologized to me for her behavior. In the months since the wedding, Diane has been noticeably more careful around me. I think she finally realized that I won't be pushed around and that Jason will choose our marriage over her manipulations. We're not exactly best friends, but there's been a shift in the power dynamic that I appreciate. The lesson here is that boundaries matter, especially on important days. If I had let Diane wear that white dress, it would have set a precedent that she could walk all over me forever. Standing firm was uncomfortable in the moment, but necessary for the future. The audacity of wearing white to someone else's wedding is truly something else. And the fact that she had a backup outfit in her car proves she knew exactly what she was doing and expected to get away with it. Thank goodness for a maid of honor who wasn't afraid to handle business. Let's continue with another story, this one about family expectations and boundaries. My parents disowned me for not giving them my bonus so they could pay for my brother's wedding. I grew up in a family where everything revolved around my older brother, Michael. He was the golden child who could do no wrong, while I was the afterthought who was expected to support his dreams and stay in the background. I accepted this dynamic for most of my life because I didn't know any different. After college, I worked hard to establish myself in the finance industry. I started at an entry-level position and worked my way up through long hours and constant self-improvement. By my late 20s, I was doing well enough to be comfortable, though nothing extravagant. Michael, meanwhile, had bounced from job to job, always blaming external factors for his failures. My parents constantly bailed him out, paying his rent when he couldn't, covering his credit card bills, and generally enabling his lack of responsibility. When Michael got engaged to his girlfriend, our parents were thrilled. They immediately started planning an elaborate wedding that was way beyond their financial means. They took out loans, maxed out credit cards, and assumed that somehow everything would work out. About 3 months before the wedding, the financial reality hit. They had overspent and couldn't cover the remaining costs. The venue was threatening to cancel unless they received payment. That's when my parents came to me. I had recently received a year-end bonus that was larger than expected. I hadn't told anyone about it, but my mother has a way of finding things out. She called me one evening and said she needed to talk about something important. When I arrived at their house, both parents were waiting with serious expressions. They explained the situation with Michael's wedding and said they needed my help. They wanted me to give them my entire bonus, about $15,000, to cover the remaining wedding costs. I was stunned. They weren't asking for a loan. They were asking me to give them my bonus outright, money I had earned and planned to use for my own savings and goals. I asked why Michael couldn't scale back the wedding, or why they couldn't ask other relatives for help. My mother looked offended and said that Michael deserved a perfect wedding and that as his sister I should want to contribute to his happiness. I told them no. I explained that I had worked hard for that bonus and had my own financial goals. I said I would be happy to give a reasonable gift for the wedding, but I wasn't going to fund the entire remaining balance. My father's face went red with anger. He called me selfish and ungrateful. He said they had sacrificed so much to raise me, and this was how I repaid them. He reminded me of every expense they had incurred on my behalf, as if raising a child was a loan to be repaid. My mother cried and said she couldn't believe I would let my brother's wedding be ruined over money. She said I had always been jealous of Michael, and this was my way of punishing him. I held firm. I told them I loved them and loved Michael, but my money was my own to do with as I saw fit. I left their house, with my father's angry voice ringing in my ears. The wedding went ahead with some scaling back. They found ways to cut costs and apparently borrowed money from other relatives. I attended and gave a generous gift, trying to be supportive despite the earlier conflict. But things were never the same. My parents barely spoke to me at the wedding, and haven't spoken to me much since. They told extended family that I refused to help with my brother's wedding because I was jealous of his happiness. They painted me as the villain in this story. It's been 2 years now. I've tried to reach out a few times, but my attempts are met with cold responses or silence. Michael has occasionally been cordial, though our relationship was never close to begin with. My parents seem to have decided that my refusal to give them money was an unforgivable betrayal. What hurts most is that their love for me was apparently conditional on my willingness to put their needs and Michael's needs above my own. When I asserted a boundary, I became disposable. I've done a lot of therapy to work through these feelings. I've come to understand that the family dynamic I grew up in was dysfunctional and that my parents' expectations were unreasonable. That doesn't make the estrangement hurt any less, but it helps me see that I made the right choice. I'm building a life that isn't centered on being someone's backup support system. I have friends who value me for who I am, not for what I can provide. I have a partner who treats me as an equal, not as a resource to be exploited. If my parents ever decide they want a real relationship with me, I'll be open to that conversation. But I won't apologize for having boundaries, and I won't pretend that their request was reasonable. Some prices are too high to pay, even for family. That story is heartbreaking, but also kind of empowering. The expectation that she should hand over her entire bonus to fund her brother's wedding is absolutely wild. And the fact that her parents essentially disowned her for saying no shows that their love was always transactional. Sometimes setting boundaries costs you relationships, but those relationships were never real to begin with. Let's take a moment to breathe and shift to a story that's a bit lighter. Still dramatic, but with a more satisfying conclusion. My entitled aunt tried to steal my college fund and got exactly what she deserved. When I was born, my grandparents started a college fund for me. They contributed to it regularly throughout my childhood, and by the time I was ready for college, it had grown to about $50,000. It wasn't enough to cover everything, but it was a significant head start. My aunt, my father's sister, has always been the type to think the world owes her something. She's never held down a job for more than a year, has made terrible financial decisions, and has consistently expected family members to bail her out. My grandparents, bless their hearts, often helped her because they felt guilty and wanted to keep the peace. When I turned 18 and was getting ready to start college, something strange happened. The college fund, which had been held in a joint account with my grandmother, was suddenly nearly empty. Over $45,000 had been withdrawn over the course of several months. My parents were furious and immediately suspected my aunt. When confronted, she admitted to taking the money but claimed she had an understanding with my grandmother. She said Grandma had promised her the money to help with her debts and that I would be fine getting student loans like everyone else. My grandmother was horrified. She had never made any such promise. She had trusted my aunt with account access for emergencies, not for theft. She demanded that my aunt return the money immediately. My aunt's response was to double down. She said the money was gone, spent on her debts and other expenses. She couldn't return what she didn't have. She suggested that Grandma just add more money to my fund and move on. The family was divided. My grandfather wanted to press charges. My parents agreed. My grandmother was torn between justice and not wanting to see her daughter in legal trouble. What happened next was partly luck and partly karma. My aunt had used some of the stolen money to invest in what she believed was a sure thing, some kind of business opportunity a friend had told her about. She had put in about $20,000, expecting massive returns. The business opportunity was a scam, a Ponzi scheme that collapsed within months. My aunt lost every penny she had invested. Now she was not only in debt from before, but also out the money she had stolen and invested. She came crawling back to my grandmother, crying about how she had been victimized and needed help. My grandmother, who had been wavering on whether to pursue legal action, finally saw my aunt clearly. She told her that she had made her bed and would have to lie in it. There would be no more help, no more bailouts, no more access to family funds. As for my college fund, my grandparents managed to replenish about half of it from their savings. My parents covered some additional expenses, and I took out a modest student loan to cover the rest. It wasn't ideal, but I made it work. My aunt tried to repair the relationship over the years, but the trust was gone. She wasn't invited to family gatherings anymore, and most relatives stopped speaking to her entirely. She eventually moved to another state, probably because she had burned all her bridges locally. The last I heard, she was working a minimum wage job and living in a small apartment. She occasionally posts on social media about how family abandoned her in her time of need, conveniently leaving out the part where she stole from her own niece. I graduated from college, built a successful career, and recently bought my first home. My grandparents, who are still alive and well, came to my housewarming party and told me how proud they were. My aunt wasn't mentioned. Some people might feel sorry for my aunt, ending up alone and struggling after a lifetime of bad choices. I understand that perspective. But she had countless opportunities to do the right thing and chose theft and lies instead. Actions have consequences, and hers finally caught up with her. That aunt really thought stealing from her niece's college fund would have no repercussions, and then losing the stolen money in a Ponzi scheme on top of everything else? That's karma, working overtime. The fact that she still tries to play the victim shows that some people never learn. Let's continue with a relationship story that shows how sometimes the trash takes itself out. My boyfriend of 3 years broke up with me because I got a promotion and now make more money than him. Dating in your late 20s can be challenging, but when I met Ryan, I thought I had found someone special. We met through mutual friends, hit it off immediately, and quickly became inseparable. We shared the same sense of humour, had similar life goals, and genuinely enjoyed spending time together. For the first 2 years of our relationship, everything was great. We supported each other's careers, celebrated each other's successes, and navigated challenges together. I was working as a marketing coordinator, and he was in sales. Our incomes were similar, with him making slightly more. Then I got promoted. It was a significant jump, from coordinator to senior manager, with a substantial raise. I had worked incredibly hard for this opportunity, taking on extra projects, going back to school part-time and proving myself at every turn. When I got the news, I was thrilled and couldn't wait to tell Ryan. His initial reaction seemed positive. He congratulated me, we went out to dinner to celebrate, and everything seemed fine. But over the following weeks, something shifted. Ryan started making comments about my job that felt off. He would joke about me being the breadwinner now, but there was an edge to it. He became critical of how I spent my time, suggesting I was prioritizing work over our relationship. He complained when I had to work late, even though he had done the same countless times when he was chasing sales targets. The real problem started when we talked about the future. We had been discussing moving in together, and now that I had more income, I suggested we could afford a nicer place. Ryan got defensive and said he didn't want to live somewhere he couldn't afford on his own. He didn't want to be dependent on my salary. I tried to explain that we were a team and that my success was our success. He countered that it was easy for me to say that since I was the one making more money. Things came to a head about 2 months after my promotion. We were at a friend's birthday party and someone asked about our relationship. Ryan made a sarcastic comment about how I was the successful one now and he was just along for the ride. I was embarrassed and hurt. On the drive home, I confronted him about it. What followed was a 2-hour argument that revealed exactly how he felt about my success. He said my promotion had changed things and that he felt emasculated being with someone who made more than him. He said he had always imagined being the provider in a relationship and couldn't see himself in that role with me anymore. I was floored. I asked if he was seriously saying he couldn't be with me because of my success. He said it wasn't just about the money, it was about what the money represented. He felt like I didn't need him anymore, that I could do better, and that eventually I would realize it and leave him. I told him that I loved him, that my salary had nothing to do with how I felt about him, and that I wanted us to build a life together regardless of who made more money. He wasn't convinced. We broke up that night. He moved out of my apartment, which he had been staying at most nights anyway, and that was essentially the end of our relationship. In the weeks that followed, I cycled through every emotion. Anger that he let his insecurity destroy something good. Sadness over losing someone I thought was my partner. Relief that his true colours came out before we got more entangled. His friends and family reached out, some to say they were sorry, and others to suggest I should have been more sensitive to his feelings. One of his friends actually said I should have turned down the promotion to save the relationship. I told him exactly where he could put that advice. It's been about a year since we broke up. I've dated here and there, but haven't found anyone serious yet. My career continues to advance, and I just bought my own condo. I'm proud of what I've built and refuse to apologise for being successful. What I learned from Ryan is that some men claim they want a partner, but actually want someone they can feel superior to. When that dynamic shifts, they don't know how to handle it. I'd rather be single and successful than dimming my light to make someone else comfortable. A man who can't handle his partner's success is telling you exactly who he is. Ryan's fragile ego couldn't survive a woman making more money than him, and honestly, good riddance. She dodged a bullet, because imagine if they had gotten married and she got another promotion. The resentment would have been unbearable. We're making good progress through these stories. Let's continue with one about a toxic family situation that required some serious boundary setting. My in-laws tried to move into our house without asking and were shocked when we said no. My husband and I bought our first home 2 years ago. It's a modest 3-bedroom house in a nice neighbourhood, perfect for starting a family. We were proud of what we had accomplished and excited about the future. My in-laws, Frank and Dolores, live about 2 hours away. They've always been somewhat overbearing, but my husband, James, has managed to maintain reasonable boundaries for most of our relationship. They visit occasionally, we see them on holidays, and that's been the extent of our interaction. About 6 months ago, Frank retired from his job. Dolores had been retired for several years already. With both of them now home full-time, they apparently decided they were bored with their current living situation and needed a change of scenery. The change they had in mind was moving in with us. One Sunday afternoon, they showed up at our house, unannounced. This wasn't entirely unusual. They would sometimes drive down for a surprise visit. What was unusual was the U-Haul truck parked behind their car. James went outside to see what was going on while I watched from the window with growing dread. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could see James's body language change from confused to shocked to something approaching panic. He came back inside, white-faced, and told me that his parents had decided to move in with us. They had sold their house, packed up their belongings, and just assumed we would welcome them with open arms. They hadn't asked, they hadn't even discussed it. They had just shown up with a moving truck, expecting to unload. I was speechless. This was our home, our sanctuary, our space that we had worked so hard to create, and they had just decided to take it over without so much as a conversation. James went back outside to talk to his parents, while I tried to process what was happening. I could hear raised voices, Dolores crying, and Frank getting increasingly aggressive. After about an hour, James came back inside, looking exhausted. He told me that his parents were not taking no well. They had apparently been planning this for months. They sold their house assuming we would say yes. They had no backup plan. I felt a tiny bit of sympathy, but mostly I felt violated. Who does something like that? Who makes such a massive life decision without consulting the people it would most affect? We held firm. We told them that they could not move in with us, that we weren't prepared for that kind of arrangement, and that they needed to find alternative accommodations. We offered to help them find an apartment nearby and to assist with the transition, but moving in was not an option. Frank called James ungrateful and disloyal. He said he had worked his whole life to give James opportunities, and this was how he was repaid. Dolores cried about being abandoned in their golden years and how she had always dreamed of living close to her grandchildren, never mind that we don't have children yet. They ended up staying at a hotel that night and then renting a storage unit for their belongings while they figured out their next steps. For weeks, they tried various tactics to change our minds. Guilt trips, appeals to family loyalty, threats to cut James out of their will, and even trying to get other relatives to pressure us. We didn't budge. We explained repeatedly that our home was not their home, that boundaries exist for a reason, and that they should have talked to us before making such a drastic decision. Eventually, they found an apartment in a town about 30 minutes from us, close enough for visits but far enough to maintain some separation. They were bitter about it for months, making passive-aggressive comments about their small apartment and how different it was from what they had imagined. Over time, things have normalized somewhat. They've accepted that they're not living with us and have actually grown to like their apartment community. There are activities for retirees, they've made friends, and they have more independence than they would have had in our house. But the assumption they made, the entitlement to our space without asking, has permanently changed our relationship. I will never fully trust them again. They showed us that they see our life as an extension of theirs, something they have the right to control. We've had to reinforce boundaries multiple times since then, and I suspect we'll continue to do so. If there's advice I can give to anyone in a similar situation, it's this. Your home is yours. No one, not even family, has the right to move in without your consent. It doesn't matter how they justify it or how much pressure they apply. Stand your ground. The audacity of showing up with a moving truck without even having a conversation first. That level of entitlement is genuinely shocking. And then being angry when they were told no. They played a game of chicken with their own living situation and lost. Some boundaries need to be enforced even when family is involved. Let's move to another story about boundaries, this one involving friendship and financial expectations. My friend expected me to pay for her entire bachelorette party and called me cheap when I refused. Being chosen as a maid of honor is supposed to be an honor. When my best friend since college, Emma, asked me to stand beside her on her wedding day, I was thrilled. I had watched her relationship with her now husband blossom from the first date and was genuinely excited to help celebrate their love. What I didn't anticipate was that maid of honor also apparently meant personal ATM. Emma's expectations for her bachelorette party were, to put it mildly, extravagant. She wanted a destination trip to Miami, staying at a luxury hotel, VIP bottle service at a club, a spa day, a private yacht rental, and fancy dinners every night. When she sent me the itinerary she had put together, I nearly fell out of my chair. The estimated cost per person was about $3,500 for a 3-day trip, and she expected 6 of us to attend. I reached out to the other bridesmaids to discuss. Most of them were struggling with the cost as well. We were in our mid-20s, many of us just starting our careers or paying off student loans. $3,500 was a significant amount of money that none of us had just lying around. I gently brought this up to Emma, suggesting we might need to scale back some of the activities to make the trip more accessible for everyone. Her response floored me. She said that this was her only bachelorette party, and she deserved to have the experience she wanted. She told me that as the maid of honor, it was my responsibility to make it happen. I explained that while I wanted to give her a wonderful party, I couldn't force other people to spend money they didn't have, and I couldn't personally cover the difference. She said maybe I could put it on a credit card, that it would be worth it for such a special occasion. That's when I started to realize that Emma's vision of this party involved me going into debt. She genuinely expected me to finance whatever couldn't be covered by the other bridesmaids. I tried to compromise. I suggested alternatives that would still be special but more affordable. A weekend at a nice beach closer to home, spa day at a local resort, a fun night out without the VIP bottle service. Emma rejected every single suggestion. Miami or bust. Things escalated when one of the bridesmaids dropped out entirely, citing financial constraints. Emma blamed me for not managing the situation better and for allowing negativity to poison the group. She said a real friend would make it work. I finally had to be direct. I told Emma that I loved her and wanted to celebrate with her, but that expecting people to go into debt for a bachelorette party was unreasonable. I said that my friendship and financial health were not things I was willing to sacrifice for a party. Emma called me cheap and unsupportive. She said she was beginning to think I wasn't as good a friend as she had believed. She uninvited me from the maid of honor position and demoted me to regular bridesmaid, giving the role to her cousin, who apparently was more willing to open her wallet. The bachelorette party happened, though scaled back significantly from the original plan because, surprise, her cousin couldn't fund it either. They ended up doing a weekend in Miami at a more modest hotel with fewer activities. The photos on social media looked fun, but I wasn't there to see it. I attended the wedding, gave a thoughtful gift, and tried to be supportive despite everything. But our friendship was never the same. Emma continued to hold a grudge about the bachelorette party, making comments about loyalty and true friendship whenever the topic came up. Eventually, we drifted apart. We're still connected on social media, and I'll occasionally like a post or wish her a happy birthday, but the closeness we once had is gone. Looking back, I don't regret standing my ground. Going into debt for someone else's party would have been foolish, and anyone who would expect that of a friend isn't really a friend at all. The situation revealed a side of Emma I hadn't seen before, someone who valued experiences over people and expected others to sacrifice for her benefit. Sometimes the cost of maintaining a friendship is too high, and I'm not talking about money. Expecting your friends to go into debt for your bachelorette party is absolutely unhinged. A true friend would want their loved ones to be able to participate without financial stress, not demand luxury at their expense. Emma showed exactly who she was, and honestly, the friendship was probably not worth saving if this is how she treats people. Let's keep going with another story. This one involves revenge served very, very cold. My sister stole my inheritance, and I waited years to get it back in the most satisfying way. Growing up, my sister Rachel was always the favourite. She could do no wrong in our parents' eyes, while I was constantly criticised and held to impossible standards. I accepted this as just the way things were and tried to make peace with it. When our mother passed away, she left behind a modest estate, some money, a house, and various personal belongings with sentimental value. Her will stated that everything should be split equally between Rachel and me, or so I thought. What I didn't know was that Rachel had been working on our mother in her final years, convincing her to change the will. By the time Mum died, the will had been modified to give Rachel 75% of everything, leaving me with 25%. To make matters worse, Rachel was named executor of the estate. This gave her control over how things were distributed and when. She used this power to her full advantage, dragging out the process, undervaluing items that went to me, and claiming personal belongings that were supposed to be mine. When everything was finally settled, I received far less than even my reduced share should have been. Rachel had manipulated the process at every turn, and I had no proof of anything illegal, just shady. I was furious but felt powerless. I didn't have the money for a legal fight, and Rachel had covered her tracks well enough that I couldn't prove anything definitively. I decided to bide my time. Fast forward 5 years. Rachel's life had been going well. She used the inheritance to buy a nice house, take lavish vacations, and generally live beyond her means. She married a man named Greg who came from money, which only amplified her sense of superiority. Then I got a piece of information that changed everything. Through a mutual acquaintance, I learned that Greg was cheating on Rachel. Not just a fling, but a long-term affair with a co-worker. This acquaintance had photos, messages, and other evidence that made the situation crystal clear. Now, a better person might have told Rachel about the affair and let her deal with it herself. But I'm not claiming to be a better person. I'm claiming to be a patient one. I reached out to the other woman, Greg's mistress, and introduced myself. I told her that I understood she was in a difficult situation and that I had no judgment for her choices. I also let her know some interesting things about Rachel, like how she had cheated her own sister out of their mother's inheritance, how she gossiped about the other woman to her friends, and how she had described the other woman in extremely unflattering terms when she didn't know anyone was listening. That last part may have been slightly embellished, but it served its purpose. The other woman, feeling disrespected and used, decided to blow up the affair in the most public way possible. She showed up at a party Rachel was hosting and confronted Greg in front of everyone. She brought receipts, literal receipts from their dates and trips together, as well as screenshots of their messages. Rachel was humiliated. Greg was exposed. Their marriage, built on his family's money and her pretensions, crumbled within months. Here's where it gets better. Greg, it turns out, had a solid prenuptial agreement. When they divorced, Rachel didn't get nearly as much as she had expected. She had to sell the house she had bought with our mother's money to cover her legal fees and maintain any semblance of her previous lifestyle. Within 2 years of the divorce, Rachel was in significantly worse financial shape than she had been before she stole my inheritance. She had burned through most of the money trying to keep up appearances, and was now facing the reality that her choices had consequences. Did I feel guilty? A little. But mostly I felt satisfied. Rachel had stolen from me during one of the most vulnerable times of my life and had shown no remorse. She had laughed at my reduced circumstances while flaunting her ill-gotten gains. The universe has a way of balancing things out, and sometimes it just needs a little help. We don't speak anymore. She knows, or at least suspects, that I had something to do with her downfall, but she can't prove anything, and even if she could, what would she say? That her sister told the truth about her husband's affair? I'm not proud of everything I did, but I'm not ashamed either. Sometimes karma needs a push. That's a revenge story worthy of a movie. Waiting 5 years and then engineering the perfect downfall for the sister who stole her inheritance, that's dedication to the cause. Whether it was ethically right is debatable, but it was certainly effective. Let's shift to a story about workplace drama with a satisfying ending. My co-worker tried to get me fired by spreading lies, and it completely backfired on her. Office politics can be brutal, but nothing prepared me for the level of deception I encountered from my co-worker, Janet. I had been at the company for about 3 years when Janet was hired. We were on the same team, doing similar work, and I was asked to help train her. I genuinely tried to be welcoming and supportive. I remembered how hard it was to be new and wanted to make her transition easier. For the first few months, everything seemed fine. Janet was a quick learner and seemed appreciative of my help. We even grabbed lunch together occasionally and chatted about non-work things. I thought we were becoming friends. Then I noticed things starting to shift. Janet would make subtle comments in meetings that seemed designed to make me look bad. She would ask questions that implied I hadn't done my job properly or bring up minor mistakes I had made as if they were major issues. I tried to brush it off as insecurity or adjustment issues. The situation escalated when I was considered for a promotion. Janet apparently wanted the same position and decided the best way to get it was to eliminate her competition. She started spreading rumours about me to our manager and other colleagues. She claimed I had been bad-mouthing the company, that I was looking for other jobs, and that I had made inappropriate comments about co-workers. None of this was true, but she told these lies with conviction and just enough plausibility to be believed. I started noticing that people were treating me differently. Colleagues who had been friendly became distant. My manager started scrutinizing my work more closely. I was confused and hurt, not understanding what had changed. Finally, a friendly co-worker pulled me aside and told me what was going on. She had heard Janet spreading these rumors and thought I deserved to know. She also told me that Janet had been documenting my every move, looking for anything she could use against me. Armed with this information, I started documenting too. I kept records of my work, saved emails that showed my professionalism, and gathered evidence that contradicted Janet's claims. I also started paying attention to her behavior and noticed patterns of manipulation I had missed before. The turning point came during a team meeting. Janet made an accusation that I had missed an important deadline, causing problems for a client. I calmly asked for specifics, including what deadline, what client, and when this supposedly happened. Janet fumbled, unable to provide details. Our manager asked me for my side of the story. I pulled out my documentation showing that the project in question had been completed on time and that the client had actually sent a thank you email. Janet's accusation was completely fabricated. After that meeting, our manager started looking more closely at Janet's claims. One by one, they fell apart under scrutiny. The people she said I had offended denied it. The jobs I was supposedly interviewing for didn't exist. Her entire campaign against me was built on lies. Janet was called into a meeting with HR. I wasn't privy to the details, but I heard it was not a pleasant conversation. A few weeks later, Janet was gone. Officially, she resigned to pursue other opportunities. Unofficially, it was made clear that her position had become untenable. The promotion Janet had wanted so badly, it went to me. Not because she was gone, but because my work spoke for itself once her lies stopped clouding the picture. The experience taught me valuable lessons about protecting myself in the workplace. Document everything, build genuine relationships with colleagues who will speak up for you, and never assume that someone who smiles at you isn't stabbing you in the back. Janet really thought she could lie her way to a promotion and didn't expect anyone to check her facts. The arrogance of fabricating specific incidents without realizing that those things could be verified is astounding. Karma came for her in the form of documentation. We're making great progress. Let's continue with another story about family expectations. My parents expected me to drop out of medical school to help run the family restaurant. I grew up working in my parents' restaurant. From the time I could hold a broom, I was expected to contribute. Weekends, summers, holidays, you name it, I was there. It was just understood that the family business came first. What I also grew up with was a dream of becoming a doctor. I was fascinated by medicine from a young age, devouring books about the human body and watching medical documentaries while my friends watched cartoons. My teachers encouraged me, saying I had the aptitude and drive to make it. My parents tolerated my academic interests, as long as they didn't interfere with the restaurant. They assumed that once I finished high school, I would take my place in the family business full-time. When I told them I wanted to go to college and eventually medical school, they were not supportive. They argued that the restaurant needed me, that family loyalty was more important than personal dreams, and that doctors spent too many years in school for uncertain reward. They pointed out that the restaurant was a sure thing, already established and profitable. I went to college anyway, working part-time at the restaurant to appease them, while maintaining a full course load and stellar grades. I got into medical school against considerable odds, one of the proudest moments of my life. Then my father had a health scare. He was hospitalized for heart problems and told he needed to reduce his stress. My mother came to me with a request that was really more of a demand. She said I needed to leave medical school and come home to run the restaurant. My father couldn't do it anymore. My younger siblings were either too young or not interested, and I was the responsible one. She said it was my duty as the eldest to sacrifice for the family. I was torn apart inside. I loved my parents and wanted to help them, but I was also in the middle of medical school, something I had worked toward my entire life. Dropping out would mean giving up everything I had sacrificed for. All the late nights studying, the debt I had already accumulated, the dream that had sustained me through difficult times. After much agonizing, I told my mother I couldn't do it. I explained that I was too far along in my training to start over and that the medical field needed me too. I offered alternatives. Maybe they could hire a manager, Maybe they could sell the restaurant. Maybe my siblings could step up more. My mother's response was devastating. She said I was selfish and had never truly been part of the family. She said all my years of working at the restaurant meant nothing because when they really needed me, I chose strangers over my own blood. She compared me unfavourably to my cousins, who had given up personal goals to help their families. My relationship with my parents fractured. They stopped calling. When I reached out, conversations were cold and brief. They stopped coming to my school events and made it clear that my choices had consequences. I finished medical school. I completed my residency. I became a physician. Several years into my career, my father had another health episode, this time more serious. I rushed home, not knowing what I would find or how I would be received. My father, seeing me in my white coat, burst into tears. He told me he was proud of me, that he had always been proud, but had been too stubborn to say it. He apologized for the pressure he had put on me and said he finally understood that my path was important too. My mother took longer to come around, but eventually she acknowledged that I had made the right choice. The restaurant had been sold a few years earlier, actually for a very good price, and they were living comfortably in retirement. My youngest sibling had started a small business and was doing well. Nobody had needed me to sacrifice my future after all. We've rebuilt our relationship, though it will never be quite what it could have been. The years of estrangement left scars on both sides, but at least we found a way forward. If there's a lesson in my story, it's this: you can love your family and still choose yourself. Sometimes the hardest battles are fought not against enemies, but against the expectations of the people who raised you. That's such a difficult position to be in, being torn between family duty and personal dreams. The pressure to drop out of medical school to run a restaurant is unfair, but at least this story has a somewhat happy ending with reconciliation. Not all family conflicts end that way. Let's do one more story before we wrap up tonight. My ex-boyfriend showed up at my wedding to object, and it did not go the way he expected. When I was 22, I dated a guy named Derek for about 2 years. The relationship was intense, but ultimately toxic. Derek was possessive, controlling, and had a way of making me feel like I was constantly falling short of his expectations. When I finally worked up the courage to end things, he didn't take it well. For months after the breakup, Derek tried to win me back. He would show up at places he knew I'd be, send long emails explaining how he'd changed, and even contacted my friends and family to plead his case. I blocked him everywhere, and eventually, he seemed to give up. Fast forward 6 years. I had built a completely new life. I had a fulfilling career, wonderful friends, and most importantly, I had found real love with a man named Michael. Michael was everything Derek wasn't: kind, supportive, and secure in himself. When he proposed, I said yes without hesitation. Our wedding was planned to be a small, intimate affair with close friends and family. We wanted it to be meaningful rather than extravagant. The day arrived, and everything was perfect. I walked down the aisle feeling like the luckiest woman alive. Then came the moment when the officiant asked if anyone had any objections. I heard a voice from the back of the venue. Derek had somehow found out about the wedding and had shown up uninvited. He stood up and declared that I was making a mistake and that I belonged with him. The room went silent. All eyes turned to me and then to Derek. My heart was pounding, not because I had any doubts about Michael, but because I was furious that Derek would try to ruin my day. Before I could respond, Michael stepped forward. He calmly asked Derek to leave, saying this wasn't the time or place for whatever issues he needed to work out. Derek ignored him and started walking toward the altar, launching into a speech about how our love was destined and how I had never stopped loving him. Here's where things took a turn Derek didn't expect. My maid of honor, my best friend who had been with me through the Derek years and knew exactly what he had put me through, stepped in front of him. She told him in a very clear voice that he needed to leave immediately, or she would make sure he regretted showing up. Derek laughed and tried to push past her. Bad move. My maid of honor is a black belt in jiu-jitsu. Within seconds, Derek was on the ground in an arm lock, squealing in pain and begging her to let go. Security, which we had hired for the venue just in case, came and escorted Derek out. The whole incident took maybe 3 minutes from start to finish. When things settled down, there was a moment of stunned silence. Then my uncle started slow clapping, and soon the whole room was applauding. My maid of honour took a little bow, and even the officiant was laughing. The ceremony continued, and when we got to the vows, Michael said something about how he knew our life together would never be boring, which got a huge laugh. We were married, we danced, we celebrated, and Derek was nothing but a footnote in what turned out to be an amazing day. I found out later that Derek had been drinking before he showed up and had genuinely convinced himself that I would leave with him if he just made a grand enough gesture. He had watched too many romantic comedies where crashing a wedding works out for the guy. Real life isn't like that. Derek was charged with trespassing and causing a disturbance. I filed for a restraining order, which was granted. As far as I know, he finally got the message and has left me alone since. Michael and I celebrate our wedding anniversary every year, and we always make sure to toast to my maid of honour for making it so memorable. She's become something of a legend in our friend group, and I couldn't ask for a better best friend. If Derek is somehow reading this, I hope you've gotten the help you clearly needed. And I hope you learned that real love doesn't involve trying to control someone or crash their wedding. It involves letting them be happy, even if that happiness is with someone else. And on that note, we've come to the end of tonight's stories. What a journey we've been on together. From mothers betraying their daughters to neighbours demanding Christmas lights be taken down, from workplace sabotage to wedding crashers getting exactly what they deserved. I hope these stories have given you some entertainment and maybe a little perspective on your own life. Whatever drama you're dealing with, you're probably handling it better than some of the people we've talked about tonight. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell so you don't miss future uploads. Leave a comment and let me know which story was your favourite or which one made you the most frustrated. I love reading your reactions. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and remember, life is full of drama, but you get to choose how much of it you let into your own story. Good night, everyone.